Welcome to College Success Foundation's Town Hall, a higher ed conversation featuring our very own Senator Patty Murray. I'm honored to be here with the Town Hall and Publisher Murray. In my 40 years as a publisher in Seattle and Walla Walla, I've been exposed to a lot of public officials. Patty Murray is the best and my all-time favorite. For 28 years, the mom and teacher in red shoes has been an unrelenting advocate and champion for public education, families, children, veterans, women, and the list goes on. And full disclosure, she's a local free press champion. In 2019, she helped save at least 24 daily local newspapers across the country from going out of business with a modified pension bill, and not the least of which was the Seattle Times. My close friend, Dr. Sam Smith, introduced me to CSF 2 decades ago. The results CSF achieves are remarkable. 98% graduate from high school, 61% graduate from college, rates far above normal low-income families. And CSF figured out how to make them successful. Financial aid, student training, and a caring mentor. This should be the model for public funding of education, but unfortunately it isn't. K-12 public education in our state is racist and discriminatory. It's driven by a levy system which ensures underfunding in low-income communities. Unfortunately, we're not an outlier. Some form of this discrimination occurs across almost all the country. At the Seattle Times and for the blethen family, achieving equity in education is the holy grail. We believe education and healthcare inequity are our two most pervasive drivers of the nation's societal fault lines. In 2011, the legislature made it clear they were about to once again defund higher education. It would have been 10 years in a row. We knew that the cuts were going to fall hardest on those who needed it most and those who had the least access. We at the Times knew we had to do something, so we created a public service campaign, the Greater Good campaign, to stop the defunding of higher education. The campaign was remarkably successful, so much so there's been increased funding every year since. That success emboldened us to pitch the Gates Foundation on a new concept, an expanded new staff to exclusively cover K-12 and early education in a deep and rich manner, which would otherwise not be possible. In 2013, thanks to Gates, we launched EdLab. Gates has provided continuously funding every year ever since then, and EdLab has become a national model. Suffice it to say, our family and the Seattle Times are all in on building fairness and equality in our state's public education system. James, I'll turn it over to you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Frank. And let me say how great it is to partner with you and the Seattle Times for such an important conversation.
Thank you.
Incredible team at the Times, as you know. And if you don't mind, please send an appreciation to Katie, Philip, Chandler over there. They have just been absolutely great and with this endeavor, please. And I'd like to thank everyone out there who has joined us this afternoon, as well as this evening in DC. Education is the cornerstone of our democracy. I realize that I'm biased running an education program focused on education, but education opens the door of possibilities. And we at College Success Foundation believe it should be available to everyone. For those of you who may not know, CSF has been around for 20 years. We directly serve 10,000 students a year in all 4 corners of Washington State and in Southeast Washington, DC. Our model starts as early as middle school, and works with students through high school, ultimately through college completion. Our aim is to level the playing field and provide the chance for all students to succeed. There's an enormous academic achievement gap in this country, as we all know, one that existed ever since our founding. Students from high-income families graduate 4 times the rate of students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And we all know that this gap has widened due to the impact of the pandemic. Our student experience increased levels of housing and food insecurities as schools and campuses had to close. Many of them lacked the necessary tools such as internet connection or computers to study online. And furthermore, students had to prioritize jobs over school to help ensure their families could pay their bills. Now, CSF and our tremendous staff and advisors do an incredible job, but we realize and we recognize that we cannot grow to scale and the size enough to serve all students. This is why we need an entity like the US government with the influence, capacity, and resources to create systemic level change, which of course is why we're here this afternoon. And why we're so blessed to have with us one of the country's biggest educational allies, Senator Patty Murray. Senator Murray is the first female senator from Washington State and is, again, the chairwoman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, which is widely known as the HELP Committee. This, of course, means she is the perfect person to speak to today's education matters. And she's a proud WSU Cougar. I'm gonna say go Cougs.
Thank you.
She's from Bothell, Washington. Got a chance to talk about Bothell, which is my rest stop on my bike ride along the Burke-Gilman Trail. And as Frank had mentioned earlier, she has championed support for veterans, infrastructure, healthcare, women's issues, and of course, education. With no further ado, I have the distinct honor of welcoming our representative, Senator Patty Murray. I yield the microphone and the floor to the gracious and honorable Patty Murray.
James, thank you for that really kind introduction. All the great work you do. Frank, it is great to see you. Thank you for the Seattle Times and all the work you do to help so many students. I so appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone who's on with us today and the opportunity to speak with all of you. Thank you for being here. And of course, thank you to the College Success Foundation and the Seattle Times again for this really important conversation. As the now chair of the Senate Education Committee, I couldn't be more excited to talk about the work I'm doing in Congress to make college more affordable, improve access and equity, and hold colleges accountable for student success, and make our campuses safe for all students in Washington State and across the country. And for me, this issue really is personal. It was actually thanks to Pell Grants and student loans that I was able to graduate and get a great education from Washington State University. The support that my family and I got through student loans and Pell Grants was the difference between 7 kids in my family who might not have graduated from high school or college and the 7 adults that we have grown up to be today, all college graduates, all working hard, paying taxes, and doing our best to contribute to the economy. This is what guides me as I work in the Senate to make higher education more affordable and accessible for everyone. Because I believe that every student deserves the same opportunity to get a higher education and have a shot at success. But you know, for too long, and for too many students across Washington State, pursuing higher education after high school has really been out of reach. Or the only option available saddles them with so much debt that it keeps them from buying a home or starting a business or taking whatever next steps they'd like to. So we are here tonight to talk about breaking barriers when it comes to accessing higher education. And while these barriers have long existed, this conversation has never been more critical, given this pandemic has thrown our higher education system into an even worse crisis. Students hit hard by COVID are struggling to afford basic necessities and scrape together the money they need for tuition and cost of living. Institutions have been grappling with budget challenges and the need to implement critical public health measures. And these challenges have been even more severe for historically under-resourced institutions like our HCBUs and HBCUs and minority serving institutions and community colleges, as well as our students with low income, students of color, LGBTQ students, students with disabilities who have long faced inequities in our higher education system. The same students, by the way, have always faced more challenges when it comes to accessing higher education as a result of systemic inequity. Fortunately, now with the Biden administration and a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate, we were able to get right to work in March to pass a sweeping relief bill to get our country back on its feet. It's the American Rescue Plan, and it provided $40 billion in funding for higher education to get students the much needed emergency financial aid and ensure that our colleges can implement public health measures and help put an end to this virus. We also made sure that student loan forgiveness was tax-free, full stop. Now we are already seeing these funds at work, making a difference by getting students much needed financial relief and helping ensure our institutions can weather this storm. But the painful reality is that higher education was actually at a crisis point well before this pandemic struck. Before COVID-19, student debt was already at an historic high. The cost of higher education was relentlessly on the rise. The roots of systemic racism were already deep and damaging, and campus sexual assault was already an epidemic. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done, because getting back to that normal is not good enough when normal already was not working for so many students and families. We have got to build back fairer and stronger to make sure higher education is affordable and accessible for everyone. Now, as a former community college instructor myself, I am overjoyed that we now have a teacher in the White House. Our First Lady, Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, knows better than anyone the value of a strong public education and the difference that it makes for our families and our communities. And President Biden understands that in order to build back an economy that works for everyone, we need to make sure all students can get the education and the skills that they need to succeed. And that includes expanding access to community and technical colleges, so more people have a path to a new or better job that will provide them with economic security. You know, over the last 40 years, we have seen the most growth in jobs requiring higher levels of job preparation, including education and training. And today, 70% of jobs are held by people with more than a high school degree. Workers in our state of Washington need and they deserve additional support so they can build their skills, increase their earnings, remain competitive, and share in the benefits of the new economy. The proposed American Families Plan does just that by providing free community college, an effort that I've actually supported for years. And I'm proud that this proposal from the White House is modeled off the legislation that I recently introduced with Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, and it's called the America's College Promise Act. And that legislation really is an important down payment on making college and higher education more affordable for everyone. And like I mentioned, I taught community college in Washington State, and I have seen firsthand how these institutions can change students' lives. So I'm really thrilled that this proposal is part of the American Families Plan, and I'm going to be working very hard to get it over the finish line. In addition, last year, I was very proud to work in a bipartisan way to pass legislation to significantly expand who is eligible for financial aid, to remove barriers that students face in trying to get that aid, provide financial relief for historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and better support working students, working families, students with low incomes, and student parents. And that legislation also restored Pell Grant eligibility for people who are incarcerated, students who have been defrauded, and students with drug-related offenses. And because of that legislation that we passed, an additional 555,000 students will soon be newly eligible for the Pell Grant. And 1.7 million grant recipients will be eligible for a higher amount of financial aid. But we are not stopping there. I plan to reintroduce the Pell Grant Preservation and Expansion Act, which is going to help millions of low-income students offset the rising costs of college. And by doubling the maximum Pell Grant over several years, and importantly, indexing the grant to inflation thereafter, this legislation would help meet the rising cost of college. In addition to it makes the Pell Grant program fully mandatory so that it is secure for future generations. That's really important. So as a Pell Grant recipient myself, I know firsthand how critical this aid is for so many students. Now, as we work to lower the cost of college, we know students and families are struggling right now with unmanageable student loan debt. And while we've been able to put payments on student loans on hold during this pandemic, I've been very clear that we absolutely should provide our borrowers with actual relief. Last year, I introduced a proposal that would provide a minimum of $10,000 debt relief for borrowers. And I'm really glad that the Biden administration is now exploring what is possible. We've also since called for additional steps like fixing our broken public service loan forgiveness program. And I am really eager to work with the Biden administration and my colleagues to provide the student debt relief that is so urgently needed, but also to lower the cost of higher education for all students that has created that debt in the first place. And while we need to provide relief for borrowers, we also need to protect them. While previous administrations worked to systematically harm borrowers and deny relief to defrauded students, I stand ready to work with this administration to fight for students and against special interests and predatory for-profit colleges. We also need to make sure college is safe for every student. The previous administration's Title IX rule made it much harder for a student to report an incident of sexual assault or harassment. And it also made it much easier for a school to sweep it all under the rug, which is why I've been very glad to see Secretary Cardona and the Biden administration are actually now listening to students and survivors and advocates instead of ignoring them and reviewing this rule. And this review is a critical step towards undoing the harm that was caused by the Trump administration. But even with that step, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to really better protect all of our students. And I am looking forward to working with the administration to make sure that every student can learn in a safe environment, free from discrimination and harassment and assault. So this conversation today is really important because the barriers to higher education don't just hurt individuals who are getting left behind. It hurts our communities and it hurts our economy. When we invest in higher education, we are investing in our families and our future as a country by helping people pursue new skills and creating a more competitive workforce for the 21st century. So thank you so much for this. I look forward to a great discussion and I'm excited to be taking your questions tonight as we work together to make higher education more accessible and more affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Patty Murray. That you set the table nicely for the conversation. You spoke to almost all of the levers that are out there that prohibit access as well as completion to higher education, and also spoke to the opportunities that young people will have or folks will have by getting a quality education or having appropriate skills for the jobs we have here in the great state of Washington and nationally. I would like to really pivot into some of the questions. I have a list of questions from folks, but first I wanted to ask you a question about the American College Promise Act. What do you think the timelines are for the approval of the act and what chance does it have to pass in the Senate?
Well, right now, important provisions from the American College Promise Act are now included in the President's America's Family Plan proposal. So now I'm working very closely with my colleagues and the administration to pass that American Families Plan into law with a significant investment in higher education. Providing free community college is really just a bold first step, to make college more affordable and provide students a pathway to higher education and workforce training without that debt. Am I optimistic about its chances? Yes. I think this is really an important time and a priority for me and for President Biden. And again, as a former community college instructor, I know what a difference this is going to make. And I'm pretty certain that the White House sees the value in this investment because, as I said, I have this friend in the White House, Dr. Jill Biden, who is on my side.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, as you can imagine, our audience is enthusiastic and has a number of questions. And I'm glad that you're going to spend a little time with us to answer them. And I know that you have another appointment after this, so I'll try to get through as many as we can with our time. And I'm going to return to a question that was related to the College Promise Act as well. And the question is, how can we ensure that by making college free for community college students, but not all four-year public universities, we will not be furthering the segregation for underrepresented students into underfunded community colleges? That's a concern that I hear a lot. And could you speak to that?
I'm really glad you asked that. It's a really good question. Providing free community college will benefit all students in schools because it will eliminate the cost barriers for students and will lead to even more students who can then transfer to our four-year colleges. And additionally, by the way, the plan provides new investments in four-year minority-serving institutions, like I mentioned, HBCUs, tribal colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions. So, and again, we hope to increase our Pell Grants, which will help students at all institutions. But there is a lot more work we need to be doing to make sure we lower the cost of four-year colleges as well. And I plan to continue on being in on that fight.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another question that is also related to the College Promise Act. What do you, and you spoke to this a little bit earlier, what do you believe is the right balance of responsibility for funding higher ed between the federal and state government? As you know, it's like a 3-to-1 formula that's out there. Do you think there's another formula there that makes sense?
Well, America's College Promise Act actually creates a state-federal partnership to help reverse the disinvestment that we saw in our public colleges, which has actually driven up the cost of college over decades. And under ACP, the College Promise Act, states can't continue to increase tuition and fees in order to receive more federal funds. Federal reimbursement for free community colleges would actually be capped at inflation. And the bill does prevent states from backing out of their support from other areas of higher education, including our four-year colleges and state financial aid programs. That will really help prevent cost increases for our students and families at all types of institutions. So all students and families will benefit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We also bundled a question. A few people inquired about the discussion and possibility of eliminating student debt, which you talked about. And it's clear that it's under consideration and there's work being done. Can you expand on that just a little more?
Yeah, I hear from so many people who are living under the burden of student debt, who are choosing not to have kids, not buying a home, not able to participate in our economy fully. And I've been really clear that we absolutely need to provide borrowers with some real actual relief. And last year, I actually introduced a proposal that would provide a minimum of $10,000 debt relief for our borrowers. And right now, the Biden administration is exploring the possibility of what they can do from the administrative perspective. And we're looking at other steps as well, like fixing, as I mentioned, the public service loan forgiveness program. So we know this is a huge issue and we are working hard to try and address it.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question is around the basic needs insecurities is a pressing issue amongst our college students, as we talked about, especially students who attend community and technical colleges. What legislative work and advocacy is happening right now to ensure that students are protected from food and housing insecurities? How involved are college leaders in that work? And we saw a lot of that during the COVID, that it exacerbated that particular challenge.
Well, that is a really great question. And it really gets at the heart of so much of what we are trying to accomplish through the American Families and American Jobs Plans. We got a lot passed in the American Rescue Plan that will help students get back on their feet and get back to normal. There, the stimulus checks, the renters assistance. There was an historic investment in food assistance. But again, we know that normal doesn't cut it when normal wasn't working for too many people to begin with. I have talked to students who were living in their cars on college campuses because they couldn't afford housing, who hadn't eaten for days, or were working so many jobs that they just, how can you do your studies? So the first and probably most obvious step we're taking is to eliminate cost barriers for millions of students by making community college free and investing further in Pell Grants. And by eliminating tuition and fees and substantially reducing the tuition and fees at minority serving institutions, students will then be able to use their other financial aid, namely the federal Pell Grant, state-based financial aid, things like that, to then spend on cost of living, housing, food, books, supplies, healthcare, childcare, transportation, those kind of things that are essential to be able to survive. Today, the lowest income students who receive a maximum Pell Grant about $6,345 for the school year will see most of that applied to their tuition and fees, with only a few $1,000s left in aid for their living costs. So as a result, most students today still borrow to attend community college or have to work a lot of hours or put their studies at risk. So our bill, if enacted for many low-income students, community college would in fact be entirely free, not just tuition and fee free, with the combination of federal and state financial aid to recover the remaining costs of their costs for college. But by the way, it is also critical that we pass my legislation to make childcare affordable for everyone. This impacts so many of our students, and also the comprehensive paid sick, family, and medical leave, so that people, if they have to take time off from their jobs, don't lose income. That impacts a lot of students as well.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. We kind of leaned into the impacts of COVID on education, and a lot of the conversations with a lot of my colleagues in the higher education community, as well as K through 12 and the students that we serve and our staff, have been talking about this decline in enrollment and persistence in the higher education system. How can we re-engage students or excite them about higher education, particularly low-income youth and youth of color, which is taking a significant hit this past year?
I'm so worried about this, and to me, it's all about accessibility. Right now, there are just too many barriers in place that keep these aspiring young minds or people in search of new skills from pursuing higher education, particularly, as she stated, as COVID has taken such a heavy toll on our families and so many people. It has been a really tough year. But the way we reinvigorate higher education and really move our entire country forward is by making those necessary investments to make higher education more accessible and more affordable for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. So policy, this a couple more questions, and thank you so much for your time and your effort and giving us the additional details that I think the community needs to hear and needs to better understand. This is powerful. Policy is focused on increasing state and federal budgets to fund higher education. Washington State has one of the most generous state grant programs in the country. In addition, the state has frozen tuition at public institutions for 6 years. We spoke a little bit about that. Despite these efforts, students are still left on their own to cover 40% of their cost of attendance, which you spoke about. What point does policy shift gears to truly curb that cost? Is it now? This is the moment?
I hope so. Well, what we're working with on the Biden administration, I think, will be an historic, unprecedented investment in higher education and in our workforce and in America's future. We are completely eliminating one of the most significant cost barriers facing people in this country who want to pursue higher education by making community college free. And more than that, we're increasing the Pell Grants, as I've said, to make it a lot more affordable to graduate debt-free from a four-year institution. And as I've mentioned, this will help make the cost of community college free, and not just tuition free, but completely free when you factor in the federal and state-based aid that will now be put, a student can put towards the basic things they need to be able to live.
That moment will be absolutely powerful. In closing, I really want to speak to the lens of equity, which you've talked about in terms of equity and access, equity in terms of access to job opportunities, higher education. There's a question that said, how can we include and improve education to employment from the education to the employment pipeline for students with disabilities, particularly students who are marginalized by both race and disabilities, who are most impacted by the gaps in the education system?
Well, you know what, it is really important to me that equity is central to all of the policy making we do. And it is critical that we actually understand and address the systemic inequities that students of color, students with disabilities, LGBTQIA students, and more face when it comes to just accessing or affording or succeeding in higher education. So the America's Promise Act provides funding to cover a significant portion, as we've talked about, of the tuition and fees for the first 2 years of attendance for students who are enrolling at qualifying minority serving institutions, those are MSIs, even if those MSIs are four-year institutions. We also include an $18 billion fund to support evidence-based reforms to improve our outcomes at four-year HBCUs, tribal colleges, universities, and MSIs. Reforms could include things like dual credit programs, or improving remedial education, or wraparound services, or intensive advising, or connecting students to benefits. So there's a lot we are trying to focus on in terms of equity there. And when we talk about students with disabilities, it is unacceptable to me that they still face challenges accessing higher education and have lower graduation rates than their peers. We've got to make sure that higher education is affordable for those students, and that once they do enroll, they get the accommodations and the support they need to succeed in the classroom. That is a big part of why it's so important to invest in school infrastructure. We've got to make sure our buildings are accessible for all students with disabilities. And of course, and we cannot stop there. We've also got to make sure that we're supporting students with disabilities throughout our entire education system and beyond. We can do that by supporting pathways to employment, making sure they have access to K-12 education, and again, investing in high quality childcare and early childhood education that really meets the needs of all of our students. And that too is an important part of the American Families Plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was a question, and we're down to the last two questions, and it's that we have time for. The question's related to the training infrastructure with industry. And it says, it's sad to see training infrastructures such like Boeing leave the state. It's conceivable that tech money will also leave one day. How can we build a resilient education training system that meets the needs of all students that they can rely on?
Well, absolutely. And that's part of the reason why the American Families Plan and the American Jobs Plan go hand in hand. The President's Plan will support community college partnerships that build capacity to deliver job training programs on in-demand skills. In the American Jobs Plan, President Biden has called for investments in evidence-based approaches to supporting workers. That includes wraparound services, income supports, counseling, case management, paired with really high quality training and effective partnerships between educational institutions, unions, employers, and specifically, he's actually calling for $40 billion investment in a new dislocated workers program and sector-based training. Sector-based training programs are going to be focused on the growing in-demand sectors like clean energy, manufacturing, caregiving, helping workers of all kinds to find those good quality jobs in an ever-changing economy. So we really recognize that structural racism and persistent economic inequities have really undermined opportunity for millions of workers, and all the investments in workforce training will prioritize underserved communities and communities who are hit hard by this transformed economy.
Thank you. Now, this final question is related to our educators in the higher education system. I'm personally connected to this, as I spent my 37 years in the higher education K-12 system. I've had some peers that will probably have brought this question up. It says, higher education has increasingly relied on adjunct and contingent faculty with little job security to meet the needs for its students. These part-time faculty members are paid less than their full-time colleagues, the tenured faculty, for teachers for the same classes. This trend of utilizing contingent labor has increased significantly since the 80s. What efforts are occurring to reverse this trend and return to offering faculty good living wages with job security?
Well, I was one of those part-time college community instructors, so I know this one. Look, our economy works the best when everyone is paid a living wage and everyone is treated with dignity. So President Biden actually included my legislation, which is called the PRO Act, Protecting the Right to Organize, in his proposal to restore workers' ability to really join together to demand their fair share of the economic growth they will drive. And I think this is really a critical part of this discussion as we see the economic disparities grow and grow and grow, that people be able to work together to make sure their voices are heard in the workplace, any workplace, and colleges and community colleges are part of that.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I want to thank you for your time, your remarks today. I hope this has been powerful for our audience here. It has been for me. I'm taking copious notes. I see the fact that you are an educator, that you're in the system, you're part of the system, you are driving policy throughout every layer, fabric of the system, and I really appreciate that, and we really honor that, and whatever we can do to support you and your efforts and the nation's efforts, we're here for you for that. And so thank you. Thank you so very much on behalf of College Success Foundation. Thank you on behalf of the students that we are serving, the communities and the partners that we have throughout the state of Washington, as well as Washington, D.C. It's not often that we get a chance to sit down with the key person who is really looking at education and educational reform that works for every child, and that education will translate into a healthy, vibrant society. And so I really want to honor you and thank you here. And when I see you on the Alaska flight, or when I'm on my bike on the Burt Gilman Trail in Bothell, we'll sit down and catch up and talk about all the great successes that you continue to have. And thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Frank, do you have any thoughts or closing thoughts that you'd like to make? You're on mute, Frank.
I guess for me, listening to Senator Murray is like listening to a symphony. You know, she knows this issue so well, and she knows how to fix it. She needs our support, and it sounds like you got a good White House connection.
Yeah.
But you know, the secret of community colleges has been there for 30 years, and we finally really discovered how important it is. So, go Patty.
Thank you.
I like that. Go Patty. So, Senator Murray, are there any closing remarks that you'd like to give, or statements to the community that you have here before you today? And again, this is also being recorded, so it's even going to go broader.
Well, listen, I just want to thank everybody for listening. I just think this is such an important time for our country, where we have to decide which way we want to go. Do we want to invest in ourselves and our human capital and really give opportunity to so many people to help grow our economy? And I'm in the fight to grow our economy and give people opportunity. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we're all in the fight with you, Senator Patty Murray, and we're also in the fight with President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden and Vice President Harris and the rest of the Senate and the House and our thought leaders for our nation. So thank you so much. I would like to thank the audience. I want to thank you out there for your attendance and participation. We hope to see you again at one of our next speaker series events. As you can see, these are highly charged, highly powerful, informative opportunities for the community. And I want to also recognize the CSF team and staff for the great work that they've done behind the scenes to pull this together and work closely with Frank and his team at Seattle Times. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.